Welcome to the filthy casual Neon Podcast. We are the home of all narrative events for Age of Sigmar, where to find them, how to play them, how to even run them yourself. And that's what we're here to talk about. My name is Aaron, and with me is Nuno. Good evening.
Folks. Good evening.
We're recording right before Christmas, and it's not snowing outside where I'm at, but it is the colder weather is definitely here. I'm getting a little bit of hobby time in, taking a little time off work, and planning my narrative events for 2020. And
Likewise.
I know, Nuno, I think you're staying busy too. You got something coming up soon.
Yep, and we'll get to it a bit later in the episode. Let's cover a bit of what Neon is about for whoever is just joining us now.
Sure. Yeah, Neon is an acronym for Narrative Event Organizers Network. Of course, the Americans spell organizers a little bit differently than the British, but we won't get into that difference. Yeah, they use an S instead of a Z. I guess they could say we use a Z instead of an S. But basically, the Neon is something that kind of evolved out of kind of the earlier days of Age of Sigmar. We started Coalescence events, which were very basic events aimed towards new event organizers to plug and play for their local community. And the network is just a decentralized community of gamers and organizers. We compare notes, collaborate on projects, share ideas, give feedbacks. We're mostly on a Facebook group now, and we've recently started a mentorship program, which is not all that complicated. It's really just like for people that are looking for feedback and some help kind of developing some ideas they have for an event. That's a great place to go.
If you have no clue, ask us. If you think all this is crazy, ask us. It may still be crazy, but we'll try to help.
Some of us like crazy, though.
Crazy is okay. All right, so we're going to talk about two recent narrative events, and we're only going to do two because this is going to take a bit, and they're both by the same person, and both in the UK, and both in November. It's been very busy. These past
wintertime seems to be the season for narrative events worldwide. Yeah,
there's a lot of things so we still haven't covered Realms at War, which we'll cover in a future episode.
Right.
And a few other things that have happened in the community, narrative wise. But so we want to talk about two events that happened, which is Warhammer Achievements and the Midnight Tomb.
The Warhammer Achievements actually happened during the same weekend as Blood and Glory in Derby in the UK.
They're part of the same event.
In November. Yep, in the big train roundhouse, which Steve says it doesn't get too noisy in there, but
really,
I don't know, with all those the rafters, and yeah, it looks like it could be a noisy place to game, but a lot of fun. Everybody has reported having a great time there. Steve has over the years collected a lot of really cool terrain, and he posted a lot of pictures online for that too.
It's also an event that has a lot of we'll get to it. It's very much about the tables, the themed tables.
Indeed.
So Steve he's the events manager at Warhammer World. So he works for Games Workshop. But this was an outing that he had like in a completely different event, right? He's been doing Warhammer Achievements for a while.
It's been like 4 years, yeah. Because I know we were, kind of sharing ideas with what he had developed for the early iterations of that. bouncing ideas around.
During coalescence?
Yes, yeah, I should stipulate yes for coalescence. Because that first coalescence we had a few of the achievements. We did not have as many as Steve had.
I remember I used some of
Trying to
those for the
simplify
malign
it.
portents. So,
Hmm.
so achievements it's not technically an event with a narrative per se, right? But the objective of, how to win the event, it's all crazy narrative actions or narrative stuff they need to win during the event, not just necessarily by winning battles.
Exactly, and there's achievements that um, are for things that probably didn't win you a game, but I think there's, for example, like an achievement for rolling snake eyes on a charge, which seems a simple enough thing that's kind of random and definitely not planned, but it gives some value to failure during your games.
Yeah, it
And
really
provides
encourages you to do oddball, unusual things, and the more
exactly.
of them that you do, the more achievements you get, and therefore more likely to win the prizes. So
Exactly.
it kind of turns competitiveness on its head.
It
And
does. And he had a custom general, um,
that is true.
didn't he?
That is true. We'll get to it in a bit. Um,
Okay.
so because that's something that has become very popular, and I hope we can get to that in the next show to discuss custom war scrolls for a custom general a little bit more. Right, before we get any further ahead, we need to clear up one thing. So we're going to be talking about 3 different Steves that are active in the Age of Sigmar narrative scene. So one of them is Steve Wren, who has just run Warhammer Achievements and the Midnight Tomb, who's the events manager at Warhammer World, and he's in the UK. Steve Foote is a master Neo creator of things, and he's one of the members of the Realms at War team, and he's also in the UK. Then Steve Herner, he's in the USA, and he's the original Neo who is behind the Holy events, Holy Wars and Holy Havoc, which we will interview further in the show. So I don't know who started. So I suppose Steve Herner started with his Steam tables before as the
Hmm.
original Neo, because I've seen a lot of these tables and these rules that Steve has online for a while. They're amazing and they're really well done. And there's so
Yeah,
many
and
of them, and each of them has rules associated with them.
yeah. He actually he had a great idea where he actually put his table rules in like a clear acrylic holder, and so every table would have that at hand, that players could just grab, and not have to look through a pack to find.
Yeah, that's so. This is top tip event organizers. Put your rules next to the table and don't
Yes,
hide them in the pack. Yep.
because
Uh,
nobody reads the pack.
nobody uses the pack. Just plan ahead. And I noticed that one of the tables was actually Steve Foot's table, the Skaven Mine. He brought it. He brought it over to achievements.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I've seen
So
that table quite a bit actually.
and
It's been
so
around.
he brought that, and he brought his warp wheel, and he brought all the insane shenanigans of Skaven madness that he's been using and
Yes,
building.
and can we plug Steve Foot's Patreon account that he started now? So
Yeah,
he
yeah.
has yeah, he just started a Patreon account, and he's kind of given some backstage access to a lot of that craziness that he does. Because I mean, the guy gets an idea and does some sketches and builds it from the ground up. It's not like he just decides to glue some different pieces together. He puts together a vision and then figures out how to make it happen.
Yeah, I think Steve is he's becoming. I mean, I guess like he's always been, because he has like a vault of projects that are all sitting there waiting to be used, and they're often used in one event or another. But as he this is something he's taking seriously, especially now. So he has a book His
Hmm.
Footworks book. No, Dreamlands?
But yeah,
Dreamlands, I
Footworks is
believe.
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's I remember last year he was posting. It was like Inktober, and I was trying to draw a sketch in ink every day, and he just decided to make a plan for a table every day. And some of them
Oh,
are
I
pretty
see.
wild. He had a table for like yeah, and I think that book is basically all those collected sketches. I believe he colorized them and you know added to them, but some wild table ideas on there. He's got one that's like behind a waterfall, another one that's on a big sloped. He's got a lot of things with some verticality to them.
Verticality in your terrain.
Yes.
Use more verticality. Uh, I think he, as he gets these things done, I'm sure they're gonna pop up in events there, including at Realms at War, because he has the perfect outlet to make use of all of this.
But before we talk about Realms of War, let's talk about Steve's other event, and this is back to Steve Wren,
Oh,
the
wait.
Midnight
We
Tomb.
have more.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So here's the commander rules that that Steve used. So this is yet another iteration of the custom war scroll. So again with the sticker upgrades and everything. So he was a mage already, and he had a pistol, and then you do all sorts of things. And people, it once again is the hobby project. You get given some rough guidelines, and you model whatever you want as your general, which is great. There were a lot of conversions in this event. It was very interesting. As an event that is not fully narrative, there were a lot of conversions. I don't know if this
Well,
is
and
popular in the
uh,
UK.
yeah, and hobby kind of has its own dimension of narrative to it. I'm becoming more and more a believer in that because when somebody brings a converted model to an event that is something you've never seen before, you can't help but kind of imagine a narrative behind the model.
Yeah,
I've been thinking a lot more about the respect that I'm feeling increasing for having something visual that begins to tell a story in a way that you know it's awesome. I'm still a big fan of people who write short stories or even novels for their armies, but sometimes it is like a picture can be worth a thousand words.
definitely. And I think it just gets people. It's a whole dimension that can immediately of the hobby, which is the tactile part of the hobby that you get to build something and paint, and it feeds directly to narrative. It's something that is easy. You could be more inclined to write a story or write the story in your model itself. And let us see what else. Oh, and of course there's another part of maybe you could call this a conversion, I don't know. So there was some cosplay going on in the event too. So Steve Foot keeps amping up his game, and he came dressed up. I mean,
Oh
he
yeah,
brought this to
yeah,
both events, I think. He came dressed up as Warp Digger, his character, I
yeah.
believe,
That
and
was great.
it was amazing. And this could catch on. This could really
I
catch
was
on.
I remember that Saturday morning waking up and feeling excited to see what was posted and it was cool seeing like his there was so little of it too though. I mean because everybody at the event is having a good time. They're not really thinking about taking a lot of pictures and posting them and I was like, isn't Warhammer TV there? Like, where's the roving camera crew?
That
Like,
is a good point. That is a good point. Where are you, Warhammer TV? I guess the thing is there's many ways of enjoying the hobby, and I think this is one that I believe fits into narrative. And if that's how you enjoy the hobby, that helps. At least from the narrative
yeah,
perspective, it always helps. And I don't know. So the rules package, you can download it from the Neon website. that's going to be added there. So you can see all the shenanigans that Steve wrote for his achievements. So what do you think about using achievements in your events? Like what, how would you apply it, or how have you applied it?
For me, I really like the concept. I just like keeping it a few, keeping a few achievements. I honestly, I really like encouraging players to create their own achievements and then try to meet them. And especially when they don't know quite where they want to go when they start the event. And we saw this at Nova with players that, after the first day, they were coming up to myself or Tucker and saying, "Oh, I know what I want to do now." And, they'd have a goal, and then, our reaction as the game masters would be like, okay, well, what are you willing to compromise to reach that goal? Or what are you willing to risk to reach that goal? And we had, a Sylvaneth army that ended up getting itself burned to the ground and risking losing all their artifacts and
Serve
trying
them
to
right,
trying to find their
correctly.
special forest dragon, right? And yeah, and the one player who was risking madness of his general because his general kept hearing voices in his head and wasn't sure if those voices were coming from like a hostile or a friendly source. So,
Did he
or
invent
just
the
complete
voices?
madness.
So did he invent the voices, or did the game masters tell him he started hearing voices?
No. It was a collaborative thing. I think it was kind of like, where are these voices coming from? And then, yeah, but and then we had some achievements of like, well, in the next game you play, you need to ring the magic bell in the middle of table 12 or whatever. And if you achieve that, then you can move on to the next stage of your quest. And if you don't, then the voices get louder. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun for me because I didn't have to come up with dozens of achievements, and I think a lot of the players enjoyed it. But there was those achievements that were written down. I mean, we had the one which is a good fallback position is collect the most coin during the event, and the player that's managed to swindle other players into giving them coin or not spending their coin, but basically getting it in and going like, I got the biggest bag of coin. That works too. But we don't want to just talk about Nova.
Yes. So the other event that Steve ran was at Warhammer World itself, Nottingham, which was like, I think it was like 2 weeks after or something. After the Warhammer achievements at Blood and Glory.
Close to, yeah.
So there was a build up to this because at some point I wasn't no longer sure which event Steve Foot was ready to go because he just kept showing pictures like, wait, is the Midnight Tomb the same as the achievements? I don't get it. So this was also organized by Steve, and this was one could call it maybe like the official Warhammer World event for the Forbidden Power expansion.
These guys are not messing around. Yeah, so this was Warhammer World, and it was 2 days, and I think Friday night they were playing games in the brew pub, and Saturday night they were playing Warcry in the brew pub.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that.
It was
It's good because so this is something that we're going to be talking about more, how to integrate Warcry into events with the Age of Sigmar games, which I think is a very clever idea. So this essentially followed the story of the Forbidden Power, which is all the storm vaults start popping up, all the mists of spells that hide the storm vaults start failing, and all the warbands start to invade the tombs to kind of loot them of artifacts and so on. So this is the story in Lake Lethis, the Midnight Tomb, the one that there's the big story of Forbidden Power. The one where, you know, in the end, as we know now, spoiler alert, they release the general Catacross of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, and that's the whole story of the fight for the Midnight Tomb. But you know, the players at the time, they're in the story, the armies were not supposed to know it yet, so they're all exploring this just before the tomb gets attacked. Each of the armies had, you know, like in Forbidden Power, each general had an awakened artifact that grew in power over the event as they did things. So this is a in a way, a manner of getting achievements, because you know the awakened artifacts, you know, if you do certain things during the battle, and it's different for each artifact, you get a level of power, and the artifact powers up, which I think is a very interesting mechanic. So I use that for my Flamescar Vaults event, which we still have to cover at some point.
Some point soon.
Have you used the awakened artifacts already, Aaron?
I have not. I have not.
I think somebody should do more.
Yeah,
Awakened
I agree.
artifacts. So all these people were playing in a lot of tables with a lot of penumbral engines. So Steve was very busy painting a lot of them.
I forget how many, but it was something like 32 or yeah. He said he had some help with those, but he was painting a lot of those and assembling a lot of those.
Well, hopefully, I mean, they paid them to do that, so it was at Warhammer World, so I hope he had help. So the penumbral engines, for whoever's not up to the lore, they're these engines that Teclis gave Sigmar to help make his people smarter, technically. And Sigmar just felt, ooh, can we reverse this? So he used this to essentially make people dumber if they ever got closer to a storm vault, to hide the storm vault. He's like, you're so dumb that you can't see what's in front of you. Well, that's my take on it.
Yeah.
So essentially, everyone was fighting sort of underground. I don't think they were using underground rules. That would have been a good choice for a dungeon crawl. They had full armies, so this is the big caverns, let's say, and they're all fighting over these penumbra engines. I think they were using a lot of the official battle plans that came in Forbidden Power, plus a few new ones. So that's to get some good use of. There's a lot of narrative battle plans there.
Yes, yeah, and I remember seeing some screenshots of some. May have been in the. No, I don't think they were in the pack. But I do remember seeing some that were unique.
I think some of the ones in the pack may have been unique, but I think it was a bit of a mix. So you can also get the pack in the Neon website. So we're collecting them all there. I think we don't have all the information in that pack because that was the public pack, and I think there's a lot of stuff they only gave to people during the event.
Right.
So the way the way Steve organized this. So what do you think of this, Aaron? So they essentially they gave the awards to the essentially the winning faction, but then they gave a hired guns award for the player with the most destructive mercenary unit. So they were using mercenary rules, which started in Forbidden Power as well.
Yeah, no, that was cool. Was that when? Now I confused my events. Was that the one where they had, if you brought Gotrek, and you could there was an award for winning with Gotrek in your army somehow, or killing the most enemy units or something like that?
That's not a hard achievement. Why is that an achievement?
Well, when you have 6 other players also bringing Gotrek.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it was this one. I remember seeing that on Twitter being commented, but I'm not sure if it was in this one. But I like the fact that they have this. You know, there's an award specifically to kind of motivate you to bring mercenary units, which is a new rule.
Yes.
And everything else is all voted, which is also how I like to do my events. All other categories of awards are essentially voted by all the players.
Yeah.
They vote for their favorites, like sportsmanship, hero of legend, which is Was this a custom hero as well? I can't tell. Oh, the hero of legend is the guy with the awakened artifact. There you go. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, we should try to interview Steve Wren at some point.
Yeah, but I'm curious to see like if people ask for like narrative event or narrative things, because the terrain they have there, they have playable dioramas that are just
Oh yeah.
begging for a narrative battle to be played in it.
Well, I remember a narrative event at Warhammer World back in, I want to say, it may have been even 2015. It was before the General's Handbook, and it was like the winter. I'm gonna have to do research. I should have done that.
Oh, I
Before
know
we
which one you're
recorded.
talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
had the winter sorceresses, right?
Right. Yes, and you were trying to. Yeah, I think that was a little bit more recent. That was probably after the GHB, but yeah.
No, I think
that,
it was. I think it was even earlier. I remember I
mhm.
grabbed that pack and I kind of like, oh, they're doing official stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's cool. I think there is some conception out there that there aren't really any narrative events being run, but they're happening, and it's really cool to see them happening at Warhammer World too. So
Yeah, and
those,
this got a lot of popularity, right? A lot of people
yeah,
came.
yeah, yeah, and
So
I was pleased with on a totally side note too. Duncan was on the last episode of Stormcast, and he was talking about narrative campaigns that he's played in and even run, and just having fun with the game.
yeah,
And
Blood in the
I really
Badlands,
enjoyed that
man.
show. Yep,
Blood in the
yep.
Badlands. That book was so undervalued and undersold, in my opinion. That was the campaign book. I mean, they had playable siege rules for 8th edition. Well, I could go on. It's
Yeah.
it was really good. I think they had a lot of fun in the studio doing that.
I never saw that book. So
I don't think it was out for very long.
hmm.
But let us get back to this. So one part I think of the event that I think you appreciate, which is I think this must have been Saturday night. There was essentially the Saturday night war cry
Yes.
bit where everyone took their small little war bands and hit the vaults trying to steal items for their main army. And
And
they
there
got a
were
lot of extra
monsters involved
cards.
too.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
They had a lot of monsters. They're all drinking beer.
Yes.
And they
Yeah,
did a
that
lot of like special cards that were literally made for you to kind of just collect and use the next
yep.
day.
And they were doing like 4-player games too. I believe there are a lot of more multiplayer games that they're
I
playing.
mean, it lends itself easily to that with the
Yeah.
alternating. I mean, you're never bored.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was fun is that the next day, because they essentially freed the chimeras. Essentially, the
Hmm.
next day, they were just putting chimeras on the tables everywhere. So we were following this over Twitter, and so Steve Wren say so you could summon a chimera on an 8+ as a spell, and apparently, so this is what they say: if you summon the chimera, bellow chimera, and one of the event staff will come running with a chimera for you to like drop on the table. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this captures
That is
well the
cool.
spirit of a narrative event. It's just ham it up, just make it crazy and insane. And the event kind of ended with the sort of the winning faction being folded into the story of freeing Catacross, secretly working for Lady Ollander, being the dupes. And Catacross was always going to get free at the end anyway. I think they
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
previously
Exactly.
decided that. I think one thing
Yeah.
that I liked that you were saying that is good to see people getting out and doing narrative events. People get committed because this event, probably a lot of the same people that came to Achievement also came over. There are people who brought entire narratives for their event. They wrote like the story of each of their units, and they brought it, they wrote it out, and there was a lot
Well,
of
there.
crazy conversions
Yeah.
as well.
Well, there was even like that Friday night grudge match between Ricky and Steve.
Oh yeah, we're getting to that. So Ricky and Steve. So this is a special shout out for this event. So Ricky Smith of Cogfort fame. Let's say that. So Ricky Smith built a Cogfort, which is a structure that has been featured in the lore of Age of Sigmar, which is a mobile fort that expands every time as one of the free cities needed to expand. And it's just nobody has seen a cog fort. So he just took loads of bits and pieces and terrain kits, and he just made himself a cog fort, like with like spider legs. And we're gonna show some images of this. So he decided that I'm gonna make an army of this. So he's been loving Cities of Sigmar, so he did the Midnight City Army. So he did an entire themed army that it was still following the rules of the Cities of Sigmar, but it was full of converted units that were all clockwork, every
Mm-hmm.
single one of them. And I don't even know what these conversions are meant to be. There's like sort of like mechanized units, and he was doing a full-on narrative. So he essentially decided, I'm starting with narrative with this army, and whoever dies during this event has died in my narrative. So whenever he takes his army somewhere else, they're dead, and he needs some new ones.
Right.
Like, what
Right.
do you think of that? I mean, this is something me and Aaron were talking about before. That what do you think of this? Like this way of doing, let's call it fan fiction. It's your own fan fiction of your own army, and you take it with you.
And possibly leave it behind on the field of battle when it's been butchered. Yeah.
Are you suggesting doing something to the model that stays behind?
Well, this is like kind of a joke that's been around for a while. Like the whole like playing back alley hammer where
Oh,
you're playing for pink slips or even when somebody captures your general, you give them the model. But even just like a little token could be a lot of fun. Just a lot of possibilities.
no,
But
I was traumatized in childhood by marbles. I lost many marbles. I won't do it. Traumatized. Uh,
but what about painting a scar on a face of a model that takes a grievous wound in combat?
I mean, I've suggested, I think, for very specialized events like Mordheim or Warcry now that has a proper injury
Mm-hmm.
table, once in a while you can run an event where every time somebody gets a severe injury, you go there with a set of pliers, and then after blood for the blood god, then you lost an arm, you lost a leg. But what do you think of, like, people having this, you forcing yourself to follow a narrative for your own army? You come up with a narrative, you take it to an event, doesn't matter what it is, and you use every event you go to essentially build onto the narrative of your army, and you take that narrative with you purely independently of whatever everyone else thinks, and you just follow that like as your own internal.
I think it could work. I wrote a blog post about. I did that with one GT I went to almost exactly a year ago, and I took a Deepkin army, and I had my little narrative was that the general of that army was the Tidecaster, and she had fallen in love with a wizard who had a dragon. So I had actually brought in as an ally that high elf wizard on dragon and worked it in. And then I had the Soul Scryer in that Deepkin army was actually like her lieutenant. Her name was Captain Ulrika, with starting with an
Mhm.
O, and so I told each opponent at the start of the game, I kind of give them the little brief thing that her Soul Scryer lieutenant was trying to like demonstrate that the wizard was not good for her and wanted to get rid of the wizard so that she could be kind of snapped out of her, charmed state of being in love with him, because the wizard clearly was just using this Deepkin army to like, meet whatever kind of agenda he was in pursuit of. So I told my opponents, I said, So here's the thing: if the wizard dies first in this game, then there's a point that goes towards the soul scryer. And if the soul scryer is killed first, then there's a point that goes towards the wizard. And at the end of the event, which had 5 rounds of play, whichever character has more of those points from dying first is the one that's going to lose, and the other character's narrative evolves based on that loss.
And this was something that applied only to you. That you just
it only applied to me,
opponents.
yeah, and it was something that my opponents could take it or leave it. I had a couple opponents that were like, okay, that's cute, now let's play the game. But I had a couple too that there was 2 times where I had opponents who said, you know what, how many points does that wizard on dragon have? How many points does your soul scryer have? You know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and try to take out the wizard on the dragon because he's bad for her and needs to go down. So literally at the end of the event, there was my final game. The player that I was playing, he's like, you know what, this game doesn't matter too much if I win or you win. So I'm gonna do my best to take out that wizard on the dragon. He did, and that's what determined, you know, 1 more point on that side, and Captain Ulrika was freed of his magic and was able to restore faith in her from her crew and her leadership and moved on to other things.
So her crew also doubted her following this wizard.
Yes.
Not just the lieutenant.
Yeah.
I thought the lieutenant just had, you know, a love affair unresolved there.
I hadn't even explored that, but yeah, it was fun for me because this is something that I've talked about for a while too. Is like there's not enough love stories in Age of Sigmar.
I agree.
I think so.
I think drama. I think we should talk more about that. How to develop like what you were saying, like achievements that are specific to your army or to your narrative that you may want to craft yourself, but it would involve specific drama. You've thrown me some ideas about that, like choices that you make yourself in the game, right? That may or may not penalize you, but involves your opponent's models choosing for you as well.
Yeah, exactly. And revenge is always a good trick that seems to work well when, you know, I've had players say, you know, the last time I faced off against an Iron Jaws army, you know, I really did not, you know, my general took a beating from that Mob Crusher. So he really hates Mob Crushers now, and he's gonna go after those with a vengeance. So I mean, there's always something to do when your previous games kind of inform. You know, you can sit there. I've had opponents say this too. They're like, this isn't necessarily the smartest tactical decision to make, but it's what my general would do. It's what my character would do.
Yeah, it's what my character would do. Yes.
Yeah.
Which, you know, can be said in very good faith, but also in very bad faith. and then the whole party is dead.
Yes. That's a
whole
other story.
So together with Ricky, so the other person bringing a lot of his own kind of army narrative and shenanigans was Steve Foot. And, you know, on top of what he already had built, that, you know, he had showed in people in achievements and everything, and then the previous events that, you know, at Mind Over the Realms. So he brought his warp wheel, and so this time he took, I think this was like a drill from either a Necromunda set or a 40k set, and he made a Skaven drill. It was a Count's as Skaven Bell, but the drill actually spun.
Yes.
It was a motorized drill. So he and Ricky arranged this beforehand, and this is amazing. So they played a complete like showdown. It was the War of Innovation, the Clockwork City of Midnight versus the Skaven Warp Wheel and its minions. And you can see here the Cogfort that he built with its legs and everything. And this was, so Ricky had like lots of like custom war scrolls. So this was completely unofficial.
He did.
This was a showdown with unofficial war scrolls, right? And this was like, you know, this was on the Friday night. before the Midnight Tomb started, and they just went there and they said, yes, we want. Steve was.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they were all excited for this. Everyone knew this was going to happen. It's like, we want this to happen, and they just had this insane showdown with these models and rules that came out of nowhere, and it was a thing. We need more of these things.
Yes, agreed. Well, and I really think that there's a lot of possibility for exactly doing that kind of thing. You see it at bigger conventions where people will say, "Hey, let's do like a Tale of Four Warlords," and we kind of share our hobby progress leading up to the convention, and then when we're at the convention, we'll play some games. Yeah, I mean that the narrative can be as easy as that. You find one other person who's excited about a custom army that they're building, and you make arrangements to meet for a game, like in this case, right before the event.
And it may be that you may gather a big enough group of narrative gamers that can then, maybe in your area spin into something fully narrative at some point. But yeah, that's a neat idea to start. You just start the seed, and it's like, we're gonna play one game, or like, on the side, just for kicks, and advertise it to whoever feels curious.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that with Ben right now. Ben's kind of kicking my ass narratively because he's already written a short story and
Ben is really good at that.
He really is, and I'm trying to kind of make my Slaves to Darkness army concept.
So shout out to Benjamin Marshall, who
Yes.
is behind the narrative writing for your Fox Hunt event and for Nova 2018.
Yeah.
He's very good. He's very good at it.
Yeah, he is.
Created the God Beast backstory. I love his characterization of Fox. And his, like, was it a talking spell book?
Yeah, the talking tome.
That insults him or something.
Yeah, it has a lot. He's kind of the comic sidekick.
All right, so let's move to our upcoming events segment. So one is gonna start right after the new year, which is kind of the latest iteration of his many Games Day events. So this is Duncan Hall.
He runs something
in Blacksburg, Virginia.
Yeah, every first Sunday of the month. He's been running this for years.
So this is like the next installment of his kind of like the Soulless Seas adventures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been going on since like September, August. I think it started in August. Yeah, and he's actually had his players coming in and building ships from scratch. They've been having some hobby hangouts.
No, I mean I've seen the ships they've have. I mean that it's great that he himself just managed to get them all to build all this and put them down on the table. And they've already had so he's actually has all this material. You can probably, I think we can also put it on the Neon website, so you can find his blog at High Fleet Charybdis, and he's been the most prolific Age of Sigmar custom content producer that has ever produced. He's been putting these out for like AOS, Skirmish. I don't think he's done Warcry yet, but he has a lot out there for people to use.
And he's working on Warcry stuff too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So so this is in January 5. So this is more shenanigans. So I think this is going to be ships, coastal city, and models popping out of the sewers to try to activate this Soul Engine, which I have no idea what he's built.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in Blacksburg, Virginia, at the Fun and Games Hobby Shop.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I mean, he has a lot of experience running narrative games and a lot of terrain.
Yeah, he does. He does.
So this is going to be interesting.
I really, I'm in Virginia myself, and I was really trying to find a way to go down at least for this one in January. It's not going to work out. It's just far enough away that going down for a one-day event it requires spending one night either before or after. I'm getting too old to do that thing where I just don't sleep.
Well, you can't catch them all, Aaron. You can't catch them all. So the other one is an event that popped on my radar from Facebook from WYSIWYG Gaming, who play in Derby. So apparently Derby has a lot of stuff going on, including like the Blood and Glory was also there. So this is in England, in the UK. So it's going to be at the Boards and Swords Hobby Shop. And so the WYSIWYG Gaming, so they do a podcast as well, and they want to start running narrative events, and they're doing a Warcry event, the Aspirants of the Wastes. And I'm curious to see what else they're going to do. I mean, you can run a lot of narrative just with Warcry as it is out of the books, because it immediately lends itself to narrative. So the more people see this in their local scene, the better.
Absolutely.
And we will have on the 25th of January at the Las Vegas Open. We've talked about this in a previous episode. So this is going to be the Oasis of Flame.
In our first
Age of Sigmar
episode,
narrative.
that was actually, yeah.
So Bill Costello is running this. Bill Costello from Rolling Bad podcast fame, and it's going to be armies are in an oasis. I don't know if the oasis is actually literally on fire or not, but apparently they're going to be doing missions for some sort of merchant lords that exist there, and in return for coin. So I don't know what else the event is going to have. I'm quite curious to see what other shenanigans and backstabbing things he's going to introduce. So this is going to happen
It's
at
sold
the
out,
25th.
though.
Yeah, I mean, these things sell out.
He's got a full roster of players.
But if people are still interested, you should get on the wait list, because you know how these things are.
Oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
and you still have some time. So if you're in the area, you're interested, it's worth getting on the wait list to see if you can get in, because you can always climb through the wait list, because there's always people who drop out. And then we'll have an event here in the Boston area. So I'm running this. It's the Lava Fall Riots. So this is the second iteration of something that I've been doing, which is the Gangs of Hammerhall, which is exploring games with a smaller force, a little bit less than meeting engagements even, to try to make sure to kind of see how players can explore more the terrain. I've done a previous event that was essentially a dungeon crawl. This is like an urban fight. So the feeling of this event is essentially an urban fight, revolution, barricades, think Les Miserables or the Gangs of New York. That's kind of the feeling. So, and I'm going to have an award for best costume. So I'm prompting them to bring something. And I think we already have some people interested. And shout out to Dan from Tectonic Craft Studios, who's helping me out with terrain, and also to Doug from 2+ Stuff, who's kindly gifted me a number of ruined church buildings that are going to be super useful to populate these tables. That there's a lot of I'm so busy, so much terrain to build. Yeah, so let's see how many people I can gather for this event. It's also a one-day event. It's going to be also in January 25.
Yeah, I'm trying to come to that one too.
I hope you do.
So that one, yeah, I think I can take the time off work and swing that. It's a little bit farther drive, but not that much farther.
No, I hope you're going to really make. I'll treat you to some Portuguese food. Some good restaurants here.
Yeah, so this is Lava Fall Riots. It's kind of it seems like it's kind of a mixture of your love for Mordheim and Warcry.
Oh, is it that transparent?
So I'm gonna have to get some. I've been wanting to do free cities for ages.
Free cities, so, free cities, free cities.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to get like 10 foot guys together with muskets and swords, right?
No, no.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
know
So
it's not.
this is a
Yeah,
joint Age of Sigmar and Warcry. So
yeah.
both
I'm
of
doing
them
the
will
war cry.
count for the story. So there will be the people who are playing Age of Sigmar can bring a 10 model unit of militia,
Hmm.
like a ragtag band of militia, and the Warcry. I'm designing essentially a militia warband, and I'm having as well like a few mercenaries, free cities mercenaries allies that everyone can add to their warband to kind of get a bit of the flavor, like an assassin, a pistolier, a bounty hunter. And I think our last upcoming event, which I think has also sold out, is Holy
Hmm. Oh
Wars.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so we're actually going
But,
to
but
discuss
again, get on the
holy
wait list.
events. Eh?
Yeah, yeah. The
Go
wait
ahead, go
list
ahead.
for, like Herner says, get on the wait list because
Yep,
there's often somebody who drops out a couple weeks ahead of time, and then he'll contact you, and you'll get in.
yep.
But
So
that's a
the
popular event that's been happening for years now. Yeah.
yeah, so we're going to talk to Steve about the Holy Wars and Holy Havoc, which are the twin holy events. So Holy Havoc is the doubles, the team doubles event, and Holy Wars is the singles event. And the theme of the holy events is Steve Stables, which are
Yes, indeed.
aggressively over the top. And I mean,
They do their
yeah,
own kind of damage. They do holy wounds.
they do holy wounds. So Steve he's the original Neo. He started doing this when everyone was doing 8th edition super competitive,
Hmm.
only play 6 scenarios type thing. He brought all these competitive people to essentially play narrative like 5 years ago or more. That's an achievement.
Oh, absolutely. It was really cool. It was an honor and a privilege to get a chance to talk to him.
No, so we'll leave you with our interview with Steve, for all his insight, and we'll come back soon.
Joining us is one of the original narrative event organizers on the Warhammer Age of Sigmar scene. He is the creative force behind Holy Wars and Holy Havoc. He's on Twitter at HolyHammerHern, and I'm honored to welcome a hero of our hobby, Steve Herner.
Hi.
Welcome, Steve.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time, man.
Oh, definitely happy to be here, and humbled by that introduction. So,
No, I mean, we all, this is something we need to publicize, and a motive force needs to be known, I think.
all right, great. Well, I'll try to share what I know.
So Holy Wars
Go ahead.
started all the way back in the mists of time,
The
when
end times.
it was still Warhammer Fantasy Battles, right? So walk us
Yes.
through it. Like what led you to start it, and like what made you include the things that made it different?
Okay. Well, what happened was I had gone to an event called Wapaka up in. They're having their last event this year, actually, in 2020. But I went to this event and I met some wonderful friends, the Lords of War. They're the Holy Hammer's sister club. And the following year, we were all signing up again, and none of my buddies got into the event. And then I thought to myself, wow, that kind of stinks. I'm going to make the journey all the way up there, and then I'm not going to see any of my buddies. So then I thought, well, wonder if we could do our own event. And we had, as a club, had talked about it. And then I reached out to one of my buddies, Zach Shelley, and I reached out to him and I said, hey, you guys didn't get in, the club didn't get in to the event. How about, would you guys come down here if I put on an event? And he's like, absolutely. And I said, okay. So what basically happened was I was going to be kind of a weekend gathering of maybe our club and their club. So like maybe 10 people. And then when I started to do a little bit more research, I realized that, well, if I'm going to go through all the effort to make additional tables, because I had at that time only had 4 tables. And I thought, wow, I'm going to have to build at least another table to be able to host 15 people, or 10 people. And then I thought, well, maybe I could do this. So I reached out to some of my club mates. I said, hey, you think we could do an event? And they said, well, how big? And I said, well, I just kind of want it to be something small, no more than 30 people, I think. But I don't know yet because we don't have a hall. So let's go price out a hall and see I'll do some investigation. So that's what I did. We found the hall, and then it was, all right, let's figure out what the rules are going to be for this thing. And I said, well, why don't we just do what we do here at the club? And some of my buddies were kind of like, are you crazy? And I'm like, why? I go, it's cool. We love it. And they're like, yeah, but you're breaking the rules. And I said, well, that'll separate us. I mean, that'll make us unique.
So what did you actually used to do? Because now that makes me curious. So this was way back Warhammer Fantasy 8th edition,
right? 8th edition,
which was, its own particular way, had its own particular way of playing.
Yeah. So what had happened was the end times showed up, right? And people knew the writing on the wall. People knew that things were changing in Warhammer Fantasy. And then, so a lot of events, what the events did was the events would say, okay, we're not going to let you bring this named character Malekith because he's too powerful, right? So in the end times, he was all over the place. And then you had the Glockkin, and you had all these different characters that were super uber powerful. And I said, well, that seems kind of silly to me. I mean, these are models. Let's just play. And that's kind of how we do it at the club. So what we do is we just say, okay, points be damned. Just bring your models and let's play. So we were kind of doing at the club, Age of Sigmar version 1.0 before Age of Sigmar 1.0 even came out. Because
that's super brave for Fantasy Battles 8th edition.
We would just throw everything on the table, literally. So what I would do is I would put 2 tables back to back. So we'd have like a 12-foot, right? 12-foot by 4-foot table. And it would just, we'd have all the club members down there, and we would just throw everything on the table. At one point we had this huge, it looked like a World War II in Great Britain with this huge, we had like a big square. It was like, it was a massive, we took 4 tables and put them all together in this huge rectangle. And we were pushing our movement trays across with a stick across these boards, and it was just insane. It was absolutely insane. And we would play for days. And that was the other thing, because we didn't have points. We would throw the models on the table, and then we'd be like, okay, all right, everybody cool with leaving it here? Yeah, okay. So then they would come over the next week, or they come over.
Oh, that really helps.
Come over the next month, and we wouldn't pack up. We just leave it all here. So, and so we thought, okay, let's just bring that. Now, of course, we knew that we would have to have some type of points. So what was the other element that we could bring? We said, okay, we're going to allow you to bring your toys, right? So we are not going to nerf special characters. You can bring your named characters. We didn't care. And then, so then the guys were like, well, what my son Reed was, he said, he goes, well, Dad, what are we going to do then? How are you going to separate yourself? I said, well, here's what we'll do. Instead of playing scenarios from the book, we'll use the deployment, right? But what we'll do is I'll write unique scenarios like we do down here. So what we would do on club days is we'd set up the tables, and then the guys would say, okay, Steve, what do you want to do? And I'd say, okay, well, we have to rescue, I don't know, you have to rescue Alariel from the orc bastion, and you'd have to go in there and you'd have to do this, and you have all these unique rules that you might to break down the wall, or you'd have to do certain things. And that's kind of how the club started. So what I would do is I'd build these terrain pieces, and then my son Reed and I would develop rules around it. And we'd say, okay, this is what's going to happen. Or then my son Quinn would chime in, and then Ethan would chime in. And Ethan, he was just a little guy when he was chiming in. He was only like 8 years old, and he was chiming in with rules too. And then the guys in the club started to do the same thing. And then as the club continued to grow, we got more impact. So the idea was to say, okay, look, I'm going to build terrain. I'm going to make each table unique. That was the other thing. Like, I figured, all right, this is only 30 players. I only have to do 15 tables. I could do this. We could build unique terrain pieces that are coming from the old world maps. So at the time in the old world, I had every army book. So I just went into every map and looked for on the maps to say, okay, so for example, the Oak of the Ages table, which is an iconic table at Holy Wars. It's the one with the really big tree. the Oak of the Ages is in the Wood Elf book, the old army book for Wood Elves. And so the idea was I build it. So I'm like, okay, you're battling here. You're battling. So each table was themed around a specific race.
So I see. So you actually had locations from the lore. Each of the
Right.
tables.
Yeah, each table was an actual location. So that started to forge the narrative for the event. It was kind of like, okay, so what we'll do is you'll play, it'll be, so this was in Warhammer Fantasy, and the way it was I said, okay, well, you're going to play on a unique table, so everybody's going to have a different experience, right? It's not going to be, you might be playing Battle for the Past, but every table is going to have a unique story. Every table is going to have a unique piece of terrain that will feed the narrative for those players. So
For our listeners that have only played Age of Sigmar, so in Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition, for some reason there were many scenarios, but there were only 6 that were somehow sanctioned by the community, and everybody only played these 6 scenarios, and they never changed from year to year. Right. So it was all the battles were very similar. So something like this would change everything.
You hardly ever played Watchtower scenario because it was a scenario that, like, if depending on how your army was constructed, it was an auto win, right? If you won the roll off, then you got, So Watchtower was like one that was never really used at a tournament, but you always knew what the 5 were going to be, right? Yeah. You always knew, but you didn't maybe know which one it would be, round 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, but you knew you were going to play one of those 5. So the idea was, okay, we'll still do that because this was Warhammer Fantasy. We wanted to attract those players. You would still have Battle for the Past, or you would still have it's been just so long, I've forgotten some of the other ones, or Watchtower. You would still have, in fact, we had Watchtower at one of our events, and Brad Relian on Twitter, he hated that one because he just was like, it's just not a game and blah, blah, blah. But we modified it because what I did was I said, okay, it's Watchtower, but you had to bring the Watchtower down. Like, so that particular table that was on was the Shrine of the Phoenix table, which was the high elf theme table. That table was just recently raffled off. And basically that table, there was this tower, this Elden Tower that I built, and you had to burn it down, right? So, and it was cool. It was a fun scenario. It was a la Watchtower-esque.
And that's the thing, you liberally just threw the rule in, right? This is my event. This is how I'm going to play. You're technically the TO for all purposes. How did they react to that?
It was positive and negative, honestly. Some players really, really embraced it. Some players hated it. The idea was, and I warned everybody prior to, I said, hey, look, you're going to need to feed the tables with models. This is a tournament where the tables come to play. That's the narrative, right? It's not just a surface that you're battling on. So you're going to have to compete not only against your opponent, but you have to compete against the table. And that was a theme from very early on, right away.
So every table had its own specific scenario built into it?
That
was the default?
Not at Holy Wars 1. It was the scenario. You'd have like a secondary objective that might be, but you still had your main Warhammer Fantasy Battle objective was your main objective. Mm-hmm. Then you had secondary conditional objectives. You had a secret mission. And the secondary objective was like a terrain objective. So, for example, the Tomb King table, which had the shifting sands, the idea was you would put units into the shifting sands, and they would either hear the call of Nagash and some of them would be summoned. So the idea was to get as many as you could to Nagash. So you would feed the shifting sands. Some of your unit would teleport then to another section of the board. And some of them would die. So it all depended on the dice roll. So, and that whole concept came from Kyle Frank, who now lives in the Pacific Northwest. Kyle had this idea when we were brainstorming. I said, all right, I'm going to build the shifting sands. And we were kicking around ideas for rules. And I remember Kyle saying, hey, what if it was like, what if it teleported you somewhere? And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. So then we kind of flushed it out. We play tested it as a group. And then that's how we came up with the rules for the shifting sands. And so you had that as a secondary objective. Now, with the way I do things, I'm a very, as you obviously know from the event, I'm a very cinematic type of player. I like that concept, right?
That's what we like.
And so I don't build the terrain I build the terrain for effect, not for gameplay. Now that can be a big mistake. I've gotten better. Okay. I definitely have gotten better, but the early days of Holy Event, when we had movement trays, when you had the big square rectangles, you'd have players like balancing their delicate models on these movement trays, and then they would have their dice plastic brick, the container, kind of bouncing this precariously on this hill that I would build.
Good times.
Because my hills were not just a piece of flat foam. Mine are contoured, and they're rolling, and they have rock crags, and it's very, very, very. I try to build realism on the tabletop with my terrain as close as I can, using now things obviously have gotten better, but I used to, and I still do to this day. I use natural stuff, so I'll use pine bark nuggets. I use sand, all this kind of stuff, sand, all the stuff that every hobbyist uses, but on a much larger scale. And as the years have gone by, GW's gotten back into building model kits, right? So when we started, GW kind of got out of building terrain near the end of Fantasy.
They got themselves out of a lot of things.
Yeah, so
their hobby produced.
Right, we were dying for them to reproduce. We still are. There's still a lot of players who would love to see them bring back the manor, right? The mansion, the fortified mansion kit.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful kit, and I would just scour eBay, grabbing up some kits that I could, so I could start to build more stuff. And in fact, there's a table I'm working on right now, a new table for Holy Wars 2020 that features the Warhammer Fortress, the old school Warhammer Fortress.
Nice.
So that's going to make a debut in the Age of Myth.
Is it going to be a Cities of Sigmar table?
No. No, I already did that with the Ruined Temple City. I called the Ruined Temple City of Sigmar and Holy Havoc. This one is going to be it's more of an Iron Jaws of the North type of concept for my Iron Jaws. So it's like a frozen wasteland. There'll be snow and a frozen lake, and there'll be special rules around the lake and everything. But you asked me.
We're getting the scoop.
Yeah.
We don't care.
So, no. I'm going to go back. And then what happened was, we had a great event, right? We got standing ovation after the first Holy Wars. It was really, really emotional. It was really amazing. Everybody just said to me, hey, don't expand, don't grow. They loved the intimacy of it. It's small. You get to meet people. You get to spend time with people. It was overwhelming how the community reacted to it. So I knew I had something, and I knew that the narrative was good. And then, boom, GW destroyed it, Warhammer Fantasy, the following year. And I was like, are you kidding me? I just spent, I don't know, building all the tables and everything. I'm not even telling you how much I spent. Let's just say it was well north of $2,000, well north of $2,000. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. We were floored. I thought it was over. I kind of thought it was over. We flirted with maybe making it into a mini convention where we would do Infinity nights, Friday night Infinity night before the event, to try to draw in players, because we figured the community was going to be fractured. And then I was prepping for Age of Sigmar dropped, and I started to play Age of Sigmar in the early days, and I was enjoying it. I was like, wow, this is interesting. But you still had that weird time. You guys probably remember, you had kind of this weird overlap, right? Where you had Warhammer Fantasy still out there. There were still events doing Warhammer Fantasy. And then all of a sudden you had this kind of it crossed over, right? Where you had some doing Age of Sigmar. You had this schism in the community. And then players were asking, hey, Steve, what are you going to do? Are you going to run Age of Sigmar? Are you going to run
which system?
Which system are you going to run?
Ninth Age, Kings of War.
Ninth Age, Kings of War, blah, blah, blah. And so it really came down to, I was practicing for North Star, the last North Star Warhammer Fantasy event in Minnesota. I was going to that year, and it was in November. And I was practicing. There was a primer at a local game store over the summer, right after. So Age of Sigmar had been out for about a month. And then this primer came up. So I had a good taste of Age of Sigmar. I knew Warhammer Fantasy. I was sitting there at this store, and I'm playing in this primer, and I'm hating it. Like I'm taking, there's this game that I spent all this money building these tables for and all these years of playing it. And I realized I did not enjoy Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I really, what I loved was the community, the hobby, the people, but the gameplay experience didn't feed my soul. It just didn't. And, you know, it was restrictive. You know, you go to an event, it was restrictive. It wasn't narrative. It wasn't all this stuff that I enjoyed. You didn't interact with the terrain. Your models were on movement trays. It wasn't cinematic. It just didn't feed me. And I realized that suddenly I did fall in love with Age of Sigmar very early on. And then I made the decision. I'm like, all right, we're going to Age of Sigmar. And that was tough. I mean, there were players that we lost, that are, some of them are making their way back recently, but our original winner, Neil Vermeulen, I think he went to Adepticon for Age of Sigmar recently. I'm not sure if Neil is coming back or not, but I miss him. And so we lost some players due to that, but then it started, you know, as we all know, the success of Age of Sigmar in our event, it just started to grow and we started to snowball. And Age of Sigmar then kind of fed in to everything that I was about. And in the early days of Age of Sigmar, we were talking about the 3 ways to play, and Games Workshop talked about narrative, you know, the narrative way to play. And Aaron, I think you probably remember, and it was like, okay, I'm calling myself Neo, you know, Steve Herner Neo. And it was like, suddenly it was like, what is a Neo? A narrative event organizer. And then there were all these other ones who started to do the same thing. And I embraced that. And I was like, okay, we're going to be that narrative event. That's what we're going to do. We're going to be a narrative event. And we had a schism in the club too. Quite frankly, I lost some of the council. They're still club members, but they're just not as intimately involved with the event. They want to follow more like play out of the book, and that's not me. I like to mix it up. I like to change things. I like to keep players guessing and have fun with it. And
one could say that's a more competitive way.
Sure.
You don't know what to deal with.
Yeah. Well, we lost some players too. I think some players got a little frustrated with the way the tables played. So we went through a peaks and valleys kind of thing. So like there was a time during Holy Wars, let's see, we're going to be at Holy Wars 6. So I would say the year of Holy Wars 3, I had taken my foot off the pedal a little bit. And in Holy Wars 3, I softened some things and I listened to the feedback, and that was a mistake. Because then what happened was I saw power creep in how people were playing. I saw that I lost my event to the community, really. I realized that I was letting players drive my decisions when really ultimately that's not why I did this. I did this to be a fun hangout for me and my friends, and then make new friends for people who are coming to the events.
I think this is a conversation we've been having, actually, you know, Aaron and a few other folks, that, you know, you can't please everyone, and there's already a lot to please the majority out there, and in a way, narrative, at least so far, is still a niche, but is a niche that needs more to be filled than to please everyone, I think.
Sure. Yes, I agree. And that was one thing that I struggled with, because some of those guys and gals that came to the event, they're friends of mine. I love them to death, and they don't come anymore, and I'm not offended.
That's important to say, I think, because, you know, it's not a schism, it's different choices and different interests. I think so. Vince Venturella says this really well in his psychographic profiles chat, that, you know, you play the game for different reasons, and that is okay.
Right. It is okay. And I don't, as I said, I don't harbor any ill will towards anybody. And in fact, I have a group, it's called the Holy Chosen. These are players that get a special invite from me, that they get to sign up for the event 24 hours early before the public. It's because I want those types of players there. They have done something, and there are players that don't come to the event anymore, but they're still a Holy Chosen, because they're still people that I want at the event, even though the event may not feed their gaming soul, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. And I'm like Vince says, I totally agree with Vince. one of the things, so that's how the event started. The most difficult thing really, I think, over the last few years has been with the pace of what GW has done. It's been a blessing to the community, but it's, for me as a narrative event organizer, it's been a curse. And what I mean by that is we realized that we couldn't stay on top because I'm such a small guy. You know, I'm not a small guy, but small event, right? We're a small event and there's a small crew and we don't have the manpower, the resources, or the time to be reviewing all of the different combos, right? All of the different things, right? Well, that's challenging when you have terrain that could wind up inadvertently making the Daughters of Cain a blender force that is going to force me to change the rules that you can't just camp out on a table, Tom and Vince from Warhammer Weekly. So, you know, but that's it, right? So it's tough because the key, I think what the key is being a narrative event organizer. And this is what I've learned. You have to stay true to yourself. You have to stay true to the mission statement of your event and what your event's going to be. And I've been through that roller coaster ride, and I've seen my event kind of like get watered down and then come back, and it's coming back in full force. And it was Holy Havoc 4, which was just in 2019, was the kind of the, I would say it was kind of the comeback, right? The beginning of the comeback started with Holy Wars 2019 in February, and then Holy Havoc in November, this past November, really it came back in full force. You know, I didn't nerf the tables. The tables came back to play. They're stronger. They're better. They're like the $6 million man, right? So they were rebuilt. They're better. They're stronger. So there's good things, there's bad things, and I'm constantly evolving. That's the other thing with a narrative event that I think is important for you as an organizer. You write this narrative, or you come up with these special rules, or you come up with these great terrain ideas. And then when you're walking around the hall, you have to, like, in the moment, be taking notes. Like, at least I do. So as I'm sitting there, I got my laptop open at my desk there in the room, and I'm walking around. And if I see something going on, for example, I was curious as to why the Nest of the Ragnarok table wasn't dishing out the damage, right? Because I brought back the damage. I brought back the heat. The tables were playing again. And for some reason, this table, nobody was talking about it, and I couldn't figure out why. So I was over there observing the game, and I'm like, what's going on here? The spider's just not doing anything. I said, are you guys even using the rule? Like, are you using it? Because you'll get dock sports points if you're not using our rules. Like, so if you have – I had to introduce that as well. So we had players who were kind of saying, oh, let's not play Steve's rules. Let's just play the game. And I'm like,
what?
Yeah, so if I hear – if players do that, you're going to get docked points.
You're not allowed to play on the tables if you don't use them.
Right, exactly.
Come on.
I said, you know, what's going on here? Are you guys even using the rules? They're like, yeah, we're using the rules. We just haven't rolled a 6. I'm like, what? And so I looked at the rules I wrote. I had a typo. It wasn't supposed to be on a 6 or better, the Ragnarok strikes. It was supposed to be on a 3 or better. Whoa, big difference. So immediately I run over to my laptop and I have the document open for the table terrain map, and I update it immediately. So I'm making updates to my scenarios, to my rules in real time as the event's going on, so that for the next event, it's constantly being refined. And we got a lot better. Like, I get very little questions now. You know, obviously for the new tables, I get more questions on the new tables than I do the old tables, but we've gotten way better where we're getting tight with our pack. Grammar's important too. So as a narrative event organizer, if you're going to be introducing rules, it's good to kind of recruit other players, really good players. Like, we have Tom Lyons and Vince as they're not on the council, but what they are is a resource for we bounce rules off of them. They were really, really helpful in helping me to develop the Warlord of Havoc, which has been great. So and that's the other thing about being a narrative event organizer, is that you have to be humble. You have to know that you don't have all the answers, and that you're going to have to seek counsel from the community. That's one thing that as a narrative event organizer, I think that's once again a blessing and a curse, because There's one part where I wish it could just be on autopilot, where I could just say, here it is, go play, have fun. But it doesn't work like that. Like I've noticed, I really think about the event all the time. There's, and I mean, obviously I've been building tables. I figured I'd be done building tables, but I'm not. Here I am building yet another table. And but I'm constantly thinking about rules too, and how to refine things. So
that feeling.
Yeah. So that would be my one word of caution, is that depending on if you're on your own or if you have a limited amount of resources available to you for feedback, keeping it simple is probably the best course of action, and then growing slowly. I have a tendency to go all in, and that becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yes.
But you've gotten very good feedback. Over the years, it's been a good number of years, and people have given a lot of feedback. That's really good.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't have players like teleporting units on other tables, right?
No.
Not yet.
Kind of more of a,
Yeah, it's been talked about. It has been talked about. We've flirted with the hall that we were in didn't really allow for that a possibility.
Mhm.
The actual new hall, because of the configuration and how we can set up the tables, we could actually do that. We've talked about it. There's been some discussion, and when we get actually physically in the hall in February, I'm going to be planning what we may or may not do at Holy Havoc in November, because we'll be at the same venue. So we might actually have some of that going on, where players are teleporting through realm gates to different tables within the hall. That would be it could be fun, but it could also be a logistical nightmare.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to find a way to, at least for one game, you could do that. You have to coordinate rounds,
Right.
and it would have to be a very thorough dice down, but could happen.
Yeah, and the one way we flirted with it, whatever, who cares if somebody takes the idea. The one concept was in the idea that my unit, I'm the Stormcaster, Slaves of Darkness. So my unit of prosecutors are going to teleport themselves over to your table. They would then teleport to your table, and then you would take control of those models, and you would play those in your game. It's like a reserve unit that would come on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, and everybody has access. Most people have access to the app. So from a logistical standpoint of figuring out how those units work, that's not a problem, right? Because most people have a cell phone. Most people have the app. You can figure that out. The issue came into how many people would be willing? Would Vince be willing to let somebody be playing his secrets? It's that level of trust. And so that became an issue. Personally, the way I do things is that we all take this very seriously. And if I would assume that people would be courteous of other people's models and such, but we just couldn't figure out a way to make that part work. And then for a player to be in two places at once. Raw did a really cool thing, I believe, where they had, because of the way their hall was set up at one point one year, they had I believe it was the giant turtle moving down all the tables. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that's accurate, but I believe they did something in that realm, in that way. We've talked about that with the battle of kind of like the two towers. So we would have the two fortresses. So we're going to have this brass fortress, and we're going to have the old Warhammer fortress, right? So we might be able to do something there where it's like you're kind of battling against. I don't know yet. I haven't figured that out yet. We've also thought about the idea of two of our tables. So we have multiple tables in each realm now, because the narrative's evolved, right? So now all my tables are assigned to a specific realm. Some realms have multiple tables. I have a couple of tables that have similar tabletop surfaces. They've been textured and they've been painted in a similar fashion. Those tables could actually be butted together.
I think they did that at Raw this year.
Right,
the tables were adjacent, and you
right,
could walk
so
through.
Adjacent, better word. So the tables could be adjacent in the new hall, And then we might be able to have where that particular game, it turns into a 4-play, just a massive battle. And so we might be able to do something along those lines for the team event. So
one thing that you could always do is, at least from table to table, is something like, long range bombardments, whether magic or projectiles, because you can just like, oh, this is happening, is raining on top of you. It doesn't matter which phase it is.
The other idea is some of our scenarios, we have we've become locked into this concept at a team event. So you have 4 players at an event, right? Or at a team event. And you have 2 players on each side, right? Your team facing off against another team. And the idea in the new hall would be let's change that. Let's put your teammate kitty corner from you. And some players would react poorly to this because, some players do have social anxiety disorders or whatever. And then, so the idea that your partner is going to be across the table and you're going to be like, you're going to have somebody who's a stranger maybe right next to you. At our event, it's not so much of an issue because everybody really knows everybody, right? And they all seem to really, really get along, and it's really been great because it gives you a different approach, right? You're going to then see things from the tabletop that your partner's not going to see. You're going to be kind of like, you'll be able to be on that side of the table. And maybe what we do is there has to be some type of communication that goes between you and your partner to tell them that, oh, you don't want to do that. Somebody's hiding over here. We have to figure out how we're going to do that. It could just be maybe texting like, hey, watch out. There's somebody hiding behind that rock over there. You don't want to go over there. But I don't know.
That could be a gaming system in itselip if you come up with some sort of gimmick, like cards or something like that,
well,
like secret messages.
Yeah, we have that would be kind of fun. Like
in naval war gaming, like historical Age of Sail gaming, they have written messages that you can send, but there's usually a delay, and then you have to roll a die to see if you get it that turn, or it might be delayed a turn. Yeah, so there's a lot of fun things to play around with that.
There could be like specific rune marks that are given to, like they could flash kind of like signal flags. Rune marks that you hold up that you're like, kind of put the card on your head and you're like trying to get them, kind of like playing gin, right? When you're bidding and you're trying to play gin. I think that's gin, right? Isn't that? No, maybe it's something else. I don't know. I don't play cards. Anyway,
you're talking to 2 non-card players here too, I think.
Okay, all right.
We got it.
So, gosh, what the hell were we talking about? What was this? What was the question?
Oh, well, we were talking about tables, moving stuff around. So I was going to share something that I noticed a couple years ago at Nova. We had scrolls, and they were like spell scrolls, and one of them was like you could bring a unit that had been killed back onto the board of reinforcements. There was another one. There was a couple different things. Like one could like automatically dispel an opponent's spell.
Right.
That was successfully cast.
Yep.
And then we had one, which was the most powerful one, is you could take one of your units and teleport it anywhere in the hall to another table that had to be more than 9 inches away from enemy models. So what's funny is that the first year we did that, it was like we had a menu of the scrolls, and you could buy which ones you wanted. And because that one was the most expensive, it was only used a couple of times. And then the next year I did it where I gave each team a scroll for free.
Yeah.
So then they felt like if you give it to them, they feel like they have to use it. And usually they don't think of, well, this is a 7-game event. I can use it at any point.
Right.
It's like, I got to use it now. And then this year, I kept it kind of off the table, where if somebody wanted to teleport a unit, they had to come up to me and we could negotiate the sale of that, because we had realm coins, and almost nobody did it. So the thing I learned was, if you give them the option, like they will use it. If you say it's available in extreme circumstances, it may or may not ever be used. But it is kind of cool, because I remember one guy who's like, you know what, I'm about to be wiped off the table. I'm going to take my Gordrak and teleport him to my other teammate's table, and hopefully help him, stave off the invasion and not lose that game too.
That's awesome. That's great. That's fantastic. I love it. I love that idea, and I'm glad you were able to successfully implement it. The other thing we added from day one was we have for both events we have decks. So like for Holy Wars we have a Twist and Ruse deck that is made up for the event, and then that was for Holy Wars. For Holy Havoc we have skill and treasure cards. So if your warlord achieves his warlord objective, he can then draw a card from the skills deck. If your team secured the terrain objective, you get a treasure card. Now the treasure card might be a chalice that brings somebody back to life, or it could be all types of different things. So the treasure card can be used by either player on the team. But the warlord skill card is only to the warlord that achieved that objective earlier.
And that is part of the warlord advancement itself.
Yes, and then the warlord, and then that card, the skill, you can only have one treasure card or skill card in your hand during the event. So you're encouraged to use it. You can't hoard them, right? So once you use it, you turn it in to me, and it gets recycled into the deck. So that's been good. Some of the feedback has been like the skill cards can be way too wonky. They can be way out there. Like there were these things where the language, because it wasn't written maybe with proper grammar and in the newer phraseology of Age of Sigmar, where there are, like holy within, or when you trigger a certain, there isn't a specific qualifier in the language. So some of the players were like, I can do this, whenever. And I just look at them and I'm like, yeah, that's what it says. And so, so then, you got some of the players who were like, Steve, we can help you rewrite that so that it's more clear. And I'm like, just play it, be done with it. It's a narrative event, fun with it. Not being so, but it's all good. I mean, they for the most part, it's good, and we'll look to maybe adjust those things as well.
But I think it's important that you're also there to get essentially. Sure, we'll improve on it, but it's also important to just roll with it. It's good that you're there to push back against. It's fine, guys. It's totally fine. Just interpret it the best way it seems plausible, and
Well, that's the other thing that I learned in doing the narrative event. We were narrative from day one. One of the problems I would say I had starting out was that because we were narrative, I thought, well, I'm narrative, I can do whatever the hell I want. So I would suddenly change the rules. I would suddenly make a change in an announcement after game one. I'd be like, okay, that didn't work in game one. We're going to do this in game two. And then the players were kind of like, what? And then I'm like, just roll with it. That
messes with people's heads.
Yeah. So then I stopped doing that. I learned that I should just own it. And own the mistake and just be like, yep, sorry, that's the way we're playing it. And then one of the things that came up, and then we talked about this in an earlier segment, was the how quickly Games Workshop is FAQing, how quickly Games Workshop is updating. They're constantly updating, and I provide the players with maps of every table. I print them out. I have all the terrain in specific locations so that they can see. I have all the special rules on the maps and all this other stuff. And then when Games Workshop, and I even provide like the core rule, like I type out all of the terrain rules, because we bring in some of the terrain rules from Scenery Table A and Scenery Table B. And so, we want to make sure that we give the players the information at their fingertips. And so one of the things that popped up because of the fast pace, you have to own those things. So sometimes you have a mistake in there that doesn't, like, for example, the Warlord of Havoc. It wasn't clear that the Warlord of Havoc, the way the rules were set up for this year was that the Warlord of Havoc, if he was a part of a specific, let's say you were doing a war clan, okay, and you were forced to take a certain artifact, your Warlord of Havoc would do that. So if you were doing Iron Suns, you got to take the Sun-blazed armor, I think it is, right? So your Warlord of Havoc would get that, because he's forced to take it, right? Because it's part of that rule set. Well, then what I realized, this was after game one, I realized, well, holy crap, if there were armies that didn't take a specific, like, storm host from a specific chamber or a war clan, those warlords were at a slight disadvantage because they didn't have an artifact to choose from, right? Because we said you don't get that. they don't get those artifacts. You have to or these traits and these other things. And so it was like, okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to address that. We couldn't address it after game one. So like, for example, game one, we had already made the ruling. We had told the players, we had made an announcement. There were some players that weren't in the hall. Some players didn't get the memo. Some players felt like they were cheating because suddenly they played 2 games where their warlord had an artifact when they weren't supposed to. And they were like, oh, well, that sucks. I've been, and it's like, okay, take it. It's okay. It's a narrative event. That's not what we're about. We're about these hobby and sportsmanship awards. Yes, it might affect you winning overall or not overall, because we don't have an overall. We have the best in battle. So it's whoever gets the best in battle points. We don't do a best overall. So, but still, nobody wants to be labeled a cheater. Nobody wants to be labeled that they were gaming the system. And so, so we have to clarify that. So one of the things we're going to do is clarify the war scroll. Once again, it goes back to that whole thing I talked about. You have to own your mistakes, and then you have to be humble enough to say, okay, I have to change things, and you have to take feedback from your players. Whether it's the way I look at it is, when you're running a narrative event, all criticism is constructive criticism. And that's really hard to do because you sink so much of your passion and your energy. You put so much passion and energy, and in my case, blood, sweat, and tears, and so building these tables and stuff. And so you have to be humble, and you have to, like I said, own your mistake and just and then learn from it.
I think doing that at the moment and then assessing it, all right, what do I really think about this is, I think, what's important. You always take everything.
Right.
But then you assess it, all right, what is actually the best way to decide about it?
Yeah, yeah. And I learned too, I used to send out surveys. Surveys don't work.
No.
Players,
but I like the fact that they have your team. You're sort of like, playtesting and sort of local brainstorming team, even with your sons.
So the play testing, let's chat a little bit about that. Play testing is really, really important. Sometimes the way it pretty much works, it starts out as a dictatorship. I basically say, this is what I want to do. So I play it out. We play out those rules, and then it evolves from there with feedback from the rest of the council. Okay. So, and that could be anybody on the council. Ethan has been my youngest son. He's been he plays Slaves to Darkness, and he gets very frustrated, obviously, because they're not very good. No, they're about to get real good, real quick. But so what he was always doing was he was looking at it from the perspective of, how do I improve my army? Like the weaker armies, like what in a rule could we give to help this army perform better on the tabletop? And so he came up with the rules for the shifting monolith. And what that did was, the shifting monolith is interesting, and I bring it up because it's interactive terrain. So there's stationary terrain, and then at our event, there's actual terrain that players move. That is another model, if you will. And the shifting monolith is one of those things. And players move it across the board and cause damage. And those rules, the blessings that the monolith give, came directly from Ethan's perspective of having an army that was weaker tiered, right? So when the players come to the event, what I always encourage them, especially the new players, I always tell all the players, read the table terrain rules, read the rules. And I send them out early, and I know nobody reads the pack before they come. I know they don't do that. But for our event, if you want to have a good time at our event, you should read the pack, and you should really read the maps and the terrain rules, because because at our event, you have the opportunity to choose the table you're going to play on. So if you're playing with a weaker army, and you know that the shifting monolith table is going to not only give you blessings, but you've got this awesome piece of terrain that you're going to move around the board that could cause D6 holy wounds to every unit it passes over on a roll of a 3D6, that could help you win that game if you have a weaker army. So reading those rules are important. And so I try to stress that with everybody. Give them full clarity too. I think that's important for, especially at a narrative event. You don't want people to come away from the event sour. We've had that happen. We've only, knock on wood, it's only been one time with one player And it was on that particular table I'm citing. It was a shifting monolith table where that player didn't read the pack. Okay. So he deploys his army, and then his opponent, who actually won the event, deployed his army. And he's looking, he's like, why did you do that? He goes, well, because it's the scenario. He goes, and then he's like, okay, whatever. And so then they roll up, and he won priority. So he controlled the shifting monolith first. And it was Sean Troy who won that year. He took the shifting monolith and moved it across his entire army. Now, his entire army was a horde-based army. So he had like tons of models on the board. He moved the shifting monolith across his army, causing massive amounts of holy wounds on his own army. And his opponent looked at him and he's like, well, why the hell did you do that? And he goes, well, did you read the scenario? It says friend and foe. And so the player was like scratching his head, and he's like, yeah. And then he wound up quitting. He wound up dropping out. And it was like, you know, he was warned, hey, read everything so that, you know, these tables come to play. Sean brought 2 big blocks of 40 to sacrifice to the table. And so he knew immediately that, all right, I'm going to cause a whole bunch of wounds on my own army. And then I'm going to push because then you're going to push the shifting monolith back over my army. And then you're not maybe going to bring it onto your side of the board. So I'm going to try to do as much damage as I can early on, because I think he had 2 bricks of plague monks, I want to say, that year.
Oh yeah, kill those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So he just zapped them immediately, and then it was, you know. But I mean, that's the thing. It's like you have to.
But it's a challenge.
I have found that communication's important too. As a TO and a Neo, what I am doing too is I do send regular emails out to the players. As the event starts to get closer, I let them know if something's changing, if how we're going to rule on something, or if and I try to let them know as soon as possible. And I feel that for me, it's better to do that via their email than via like our pathetic Facebook page. Like, we don't really do much with it. And that's just the way it is. We just don't do much with it. A lot of players a lot of Neos seem to have a lot of success using their Facebook presence, and we just haven't really embraced Facebook.
Well, I think it depends. For the raw guys use Twitter more. I think it really depends on also where people have their audience, or depending how their locals interact with.
That's true. That's very, very true.
Yeah, Nuno and I talk on Facebook like every day. We use Messenger.
Yeah, this has become a long distance relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I think, Aaron, you had another question for me about something about winning, or what was it about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I really took away from one of your early packs that you've used every year, Steve, is the if anyone in the hotel, if any of the hotel staff complain about you, you lose points.
Yeah.
I love that, because
etiquette.
Yeah. And that was a mistake I made early on, because I thought, oh, you know, I'm going to have all all the AOS players, or all the guys that like endured the storm of the end times, and they're going to be awesome. And then I had a couple years in, that kind of shifted, and I was like, oh, you know, I had Mike Brandt, who said to me, well, what's your policy say about behavior? And Brian and I looked at each other. We're like, oh yeah, that we never got around to writing that, because we didn't think it was important.
No, it's important. It is.
Yeah.
And the reason I put the etiquette part in was it was an event that I attended where somebody vandalized the restroom at this event, and
right.
So one of the things I did was I put in I was just strong with that. And then the other thing I do with the event is that I let the venue staff know that they should, if there is an issue, they should talk to us and let us know. And then we, as I said, we dock them etiquette points for that. We take a lot of pride in what we're doing. It's ultimately for the charity. It's ultimately for a good time. We don't want it to turn into something negative. Our players have been wonderful. We've never had any real problems. They handled their alcohol well.
Yeah. So Matt Tucker wanted to ask, do you think players prefer different narrative storylines each year? Or do you think there's a value in sticking to a continuous narrative that progresses from year to year?
Wow. Really, I think that's a 50-50. It's a flip 'em, really. I mean, I think that there's a benefit to having something new every year. The way we've done it is that we haven't flipped the narrative. The narrative continues to grow. We have discussed the concepts of the warlord continuing to come back. I don't think we've seen a repeat warlord yet. Maybe we have, and I just don't recall, as a way to continue the narrative. One of the things I found slightly difficult, one of the things that the Raw guys do really, really well, that I don't do, is that they develop a huge backstory with propaganda and all kinds of really great stuff. And Steve Foote and Ming and Mitzi and Jimbo all do a wonderful job. And I might be forgetting somebody, and if I am, I totally apologize. They do a really, really good job with all of that, with that concept. If you have I think our narrative, what makes our narrative unique, is because of the depth of terrain, the depth of rules around the terrain, every table having a unique scenario at Holy Wars, each warlord having a different experience at the Warlord of Havoc, the upgrade tree. It's hard to kind of bake in a narrative that keeps things moving. So our narrative is more the experience, right? And how the different, how everybody, when you're sitting outside the hall and you're hearing the stories of players at the scoring table, nobody has the same, right? It's completely different. Everybody has a different story to tell. And that's really cool. And then when you see the reactions of the players or the frustration of the players, or when they're coming up to you to tell you, hey, I really love this. And the way we adjust the narrative is we take that statement, we really love the way the Canals of Radiance worked, but we take that but statement and we grow from that. It doesn't, so I think that's the way the narrative continues, is through your open-mindedness of growth and understanding, once again, adhering to your mission statement of your narrative event. Our narrative event it's the tournament where the tables get to play. Okay. So
they're the stars of the event in a way.
Right. They are by far, without a doubt. I mean, our tables are all unique. You're not playing on any mat. You're not playing on any, each table is unique.
I kind of see it as almost like your narrative, so to speak, is your champion goes, and these are like legendary locations. They're
correct.
Always there every year, and every year you get slaughtered on top of them.
Right. Well, the way it's turned out too is like the year players actually this is when you're doing something right as a Neo narrative event organizer. When the players who are coming to your event start forging their own narrative.
Yes.
Your narrative. Yeah. And that happened this year.
From year to year
that's awesome.
as well?
Yeah, from year to year. So what's happened now is the players now, their warlord's mission, they came in, they said they want to play on as many different realms as they possibly can. So it turned into, instead of just maybe playing on tables of comfort, it turned into a quest to see how many different realms they could play in. How many different realms could they conquer? And they had, and then we did this thing this year where we created our Book of Grudges, the Holy Book of Grudges. So we did grudges all 5 rounds. Players could grudge. So players were calling each other out in between rounds, and we were keeping a sheet, and we have it. And I'm gonna actually forge that narrative. So we've added that layer of the grudges, and it became a narrative of warlords challenging warlords throughout the weekend. So that's when you're really your narrative, your concept is starting to really take off.
That it's perfect. You should get like a book, like a sort of like, some of these craft books that you can get.
I already do. I do.
Awesome. Perfect. Yes.
I have it. We have it. I didn't want to rush it. I'm doing it right.
Yes.
I have the book. I just need to figure out who's going to write all the victories and losses in the book, who has good, proper penmanship, because my penmanship is awesome.
So good. And then the opening the book is the whole ceremony and everything. Yes. Yeah. That's another element in narrative events, I think, is the showmanship for a certain.
Yeah,
I think the raw guys, I think they did an amazing job this time.
They did.
All the gimmicks that you can throw. So this was part 1 of our interview with Steve Herner. We'll be back next week with the rest of our interview with him, talking about custom champion war scrolls. And now we have an interview with Matt Hayward, a fellow Neo, about his experience at Holy Havoc
As a player.
as a player and as a teammate to Manrathi.
This evening, we have none other than Matt Hayward. Matt is a renowned War Scroll designer in the narrative community. You may not have heard his name because he generally works behind the scenes, but he is a Neo of talent and wit, and he joins us tonight. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, thank you for having me on, guys.
Welcome. So we want to hear firsthand what your experience was having a hand at War Scroll Design, and what your experience was at Holy Havoc.
Sure. So would you prefer to start on War Scrolls or Holy Havoc?
Let's
Holy
start
Havoc
with Holy
itself.
Havoc.
Sure.
Did you have to help zip Chuck into that dress?
Yes. Well, it was the zippers were okay. He got the zippers, but I had to help a lot with the ribbons and whatnot, and that was it's a special moment between us.
Do you want to explain to our listeners exactly what kind of dress Chuck got himself into?
Yeah. So Chuck decided, since he is Mr. Daughters of Cain, that he had to dress up as Marathi, which I like to just call that costume Manrathi, but it's quite the spectacle seeing a 5'8" buff man in a $10 wig and pushing little miniatures around the table.
Well, I know he has he's hit that point where he can lift his own body weight above his head. Can he lift your body weight above his head, Matt?
No, I'm making sure this holiday season, packing it away. He's getting close, but I gotta keep pushing. That's.
Is this like the second or third time that the Manrathi has made an appearance?
So this is the second time. First time was, I believe, Raw last year. But yeah, this is the first time it was in the States.
All right, but we're here to talk to Matt. We're here to talk to Matt about.
That's true. So how was the overall the experience? It was your first time or not?
Yeah, it was my first time going down there, and it was really great. If you don't mind taking your models off the table, you definitely should go down and give it a try. Now he does have Steve does have limited slots available, so you got to jump on it. It's basically when registration opens, you PayPal him the money, and like an hour later he'll tell you if you got in or not, and then he keeps the money either way. No, I'm kidding. He does return it if you don't get back, but it is as far as the Holy Havoc goes, that's the doubles, where it's me and you and a partner. And so it's basically you and your partner try to work together. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And you fight your opponent and the table. The tables are so lethal because Steve came up with things called holy wounds, which are wounds that just cannot be saved. No matter what the War Scroll says, cannot be saved.
Take that, Fire Slayers. Serve them right.
I'll have you know, I love Fire Slayers.
4+ ward saves are bollocks.
This close to bringing them, but instead I decided to bring KO, and I was like the entire evening or entire weekend going like, boy, I wonder what Fire Slayers would have done.
Wasn't one of those tables where you manipulated some of the terrain pieces to the misfortune of your teammate, Matt?
Yeah, so as far as that goes, there is one of the tables. This was round or game 4. And so before I get into game 4, we have to go over game 3. So essentially how it works is all these different elaborate tables set up. And so you get to pick what table you want to be on whenever your name's called. So he wanted to go to the Daughter of Cain table. Surprise, surprise. And so we were able to get there, and our opponents both brought ogres, and so that was fun. So there we were. We got everything all set up. We started deployment, and I brought, for my warlord, I got a gun hauler, and I got the old Thorgrim model, the dwarf being carried by 4 other dwarves.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
trimmed it all down and wedged him to fit on top of the cannon on the gun hauler. So he's completely blocking everyone else's view, and he's just pointing where he wants to go. So I went with, well, in this, you are building up your own warlord, and you can kind of focus on range, you can kind of focus on speed, melee, and basically at the end of every round, or at the end of every game, you get to pick a new ability to add. So I was going with range. So in the middle of the table was a big elevated temple. So I flew up there so I could have access to shoot at whatever I wanted to shoot at. Well, Chuck decided that part of his narrative was that his warlord wanted to get to this temple. So, and I was like, well, okay, I'll figure out a way to go, but I'm working on something here. So that he decided that wasn't good enough. So he asked his opponent, our opponent, to get me off of the table, so he could get up there. So our opponent gladly obliged. I forget the name of all the Beast Claw Raider guys, but it was the big guy on the really big elephant thingy. So that ramped up a giant hill, smashed into me, did like probably about 100 wounds more than it needed to take it off the table. And then one of the abilities you can take if you go down the line of being a priest is you get the ability to grant a unit movement. Chuck realized that it did not say friendly unit. So he cast that on this Frosthorn, or whichever one it was. And so the Frosthorn gladly moved back down, and then he moved up, leaving my entire army alone by itself to be completely torn in two by these ogres. I think I was completely tabled by the end of turn 1, maybe turn 2.
But did he getting to the temple somehow made you 2 win something?
No.
That's narrative. That's narrative
Yeah.
for you. Yes.
Yeah, it was probably the most narrative you could get. So as
It was a photo opportunity, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
So you got up there, you did a little victory dance, and that was it.
Yep. And then the rest of our armies were taken off the table shortly thereafter. Yeah, current KO do not hold up against any amount of ogre at all. Pretty sure a single ogre could take out 1,000 points of KO, I'm pretty sure.
And this was the first day that the Ogre book was out, right? The new Mod Tribes book just came out.
Yeah, it did. And we actually had people that they basically went to a midnight launch, picked up like their mop pot, and just painted it all night. Yeah, dedication, man.
Yeah.
So
cool.
that brings us to the next day, round 4. We are on this table called, I don't remember what the name of the table is, but the main mechanic is the monolith. And so it's basically like these blocks that are stacked up, one each representing one of the different chaos gods. And so at the beginning of your turn, whoever turn it is, they choose a direction, roll 2 dice, and move the monolith in that direction. equal to whatever you roll. And so whatever you roll over gets holy wounds, and then it also gets you roll a die and something good could happen or something bad could happen. So my narrative at this point is, even though we had sworn a life debt to Chuck's warlord Teyrathi, we were a little butthurt, as dwarves get. So he's like, okay, you can choose where to move the monolith. And I went straight over Teyrathi. And I was like, okay,
grudges,
Chuck,
grudges.
Right. I'm like, okay, Chuck, you get to roll the dice, though. Boxcars move 12 inches right over. So then, on our opponent's turn, they're like, oh, where do you want to move the monolith? And they're like, right over Teyrathi. They rolled, boom, off the table, turn one. Yeah, other than that, I mean, it was a great match. Our opponents wisely kept just tucking it into the corner, but I kept just bringing it out right in the middle of everything.
So how many of the tables did you end up playing on? Because I believe every table has its own unique set of terrain rules, right?
Right. So every table has its own way that it plays. Now, again, everyone plays the same scenario, but the tables interact very heavily with how that works. So we did a practice game on Friday night with Vince and Tom, and then we did the 5 games. So we got 6 total tables, and each one of the tables was a lot of fun. The last table that we were on was my least favorite because and like I said, I'll share pictures with you guys so you can post wherever or however you want. And so it's like I believe it is a life table, but I don't know how, because so there's a giant tree on the one side.
Yeah, the giant tree.
And then there's a giant lake. So you roll a die at the beginning of the turn of each hero phase, and on a 4-up, you deal 1 mortal wound to everything within 18 inches of it. The tree base is so big, holy wound. The tree base is so big that it basically covers that entire half of the table. So even though I was trying to get around the tree the whole game, I wasn't able to move a lot of stuff all the way around it because dwarf 4-inch movement. And essentially by the end, we had rolled 4 almost every time. So I never really got into too much combat because A, I couldn't shoot anything because the damn tree was in the way. And then I couldn't get out of the way because of 4-inch movement. So I basically had my army wiped out by this tree slowly but surely. So what I did with my warlord, though, since I had high movement there, is I tried to go over to the lake, and I was like, okay, I'll just try going with the odds, and maybe he won't get destroyed immediately, and then the lake will prevent people from coming after him. Well, once again, calculations went wrong. The lake also killed my warlord, like by turn.
So was there something that the table did that did not just deal wounds?
No.
And no table did nothing.
There's probably 1 or 2 that don't do an absurd amount of damage, but everything does at least some damage.
Christ.
Well, that so on Friday night, Vince and Tom, we had a fun game of taking our models off the table because Vince and Tom came prepared. And so, but it was good because it helped Chuck and I get a little bit more in sync, figure out how each other's armies work and whatnot. So round 2, we faced them again. And anyone that's a fan of Warhammer Weekly knows that Tom painted up a whole hell fort to donate to Steve for these events. And so that was the table that we decided to play on for turn 2.
And you regretted it.
Yeah. Yeah. So turn 2 was you have to get your guys to the opponent's table edge. Well, so the Hell Fort is all lava bases. Like there's pools of lava everywhere. So if you're within 18 inches of a lava pool, at the end of the round, you take a holy wound, or you take D3
18
plus
inches.
1. Yes, D3 plus 1 holy wounds.
Lovely.
And so the only place that you're really safe is on the inside of the Hell Fort.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really neat. And then at the beginning of your turn, you roll a die to see if the sheer destructive power of the Realm of Fire, if it destroys the Hell Fort or not. And so, like, for us, we kept rolling, and so we kept taking out parts and moving them over, leaving us completely wide and open. I think Vince and Tom got it like once or twice, and we're like, we have nowhere to go, and we just completely left a door open for them. So also, if you run, you also take D3. I think it's D3 plus 1 holy wounds. It's not a roll. It's did you run? Yes, no. Roll D3. So it's either you take 1 or D3 plus 1, and I'm pretty sure it's D3 plus 1. Thankfully, as I brought a 2 units of engine riggers, I just grappled and just zipped. So it didn't count as running. Sure, if Steve would have thought, he would have been like, hey, take 2d3 mortal. But yeah, once again, though, their strategic superiority definitely won out that game. But it was a better game. It was much closer. And that's one of the fun things about these is even if you are losing, the table's doing so much damage that you still just have a good time. Yeah, we ended up losing that one.
So to kind of get through the whole event, were you guys, so when you pick a table to play on, is it purely, I like the look of that table and that's it?
Yeah, so basically Friday night is kind of, if this is your first event, Friday night is kind of the place that you take your time and actually read the rules for the table. And depending on how you want to go, because there are people who, even though it's a narrative event, take the competition very seriously, which is amazing to see people trying their hardest that are top of their game, and they're trying to figure out how do I deal with losing a third of my army by the end of turn 2. Like,
it is a challenge, right? I mean, it is a
right.
different tactical challenge, but it just screws your mind as a match player. Like, no, this is not fair. It will never be fair. You
Right.
get used to it.
Right. Well, the only reason why it's fair is because it's not fair and it's happening to both of you.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, the event is, like I said, it's just phenomenal. If you're either close to the area or don't mind driving, you have to get out there, at least for either Holy Havoc or Holy Wars.
So what was your favorite table? Like, just visually at least.
So there were 2 that tie for that. Unfortunately, we didn't get the opportunity to play on either one of them because everyone absolutely loves them. So there was a brand new table where it was the Shrine of Sigmar, which was these big boxes all across this table that led up to an altar that had all the Sigmar statue and everything. And then there's big channels that you could walk down. You could walk through. Again, I didn't get to read all the rules for it, but it was very visually stunning. The other one had the regular board, and then it actually had a bunch of like floating islands that were all connected. So it had a dual layer, and I wanted to get on there so I could be like, oh, I'm gonna fly my Endrin riggers up there.
You need, in Age of Sigmar, you have to have floating islands. It needs floating islands. It's the setting must have floating pieces of rock.
It is a shame that GW hasn't made official floating island terrain at this point.
Yeah, they've featured it on dioramas that they've done, but yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, unfortunately we didn't get to plan either one of those. However, that just leaves us something to do for future events.
So this concludes our first parts of the interviews about Holy Havoc. We'll be back in the next episode with part 2 of the interviews with Steve Herner and Matt Hayward about the use of the custom war scrolls for custom warlord at Holy Havoc, and a more general conversation about how custom warlords fit into narrative games. And that's all for today.
Indeed. Next time, more puppets.
More puppets. Yeah. We're gonna start that one. We're gonna start Puppet Wars.
So I do have a new proposal for. So you might like this. I have a new proposal for Jack from Rerolling Ones, because I got him involved with the puppet idea, and he liked it. And so actually, I've got Aaron looking at making a Skaven puppet, because Jack was saying that they've actually wanted a Skaven puppet for Rerolling Ones for like ever.
Perfect.
So I think that's going to happen. But thank you again for joining us on our roller coaster of narrative event updates and predictions and
Interviews.
reviews, and yes, definitely interviews. So thank you, Nuno, and thank you to
Pleasure.
everybody who's joined us.
All right. Take care, folks. We'll see you next time, and roll high and prosper.
Indeed.